And I'd like to answer that question first by invoking a metaphor and then by coming to two broad kinds of strategies that people might think about. The first is the metaphor of carbon. So most of us in high school chemistry, we learn that carbon exists in many forms. These are known as the allotropes of carbon. And the classic ones, of course, are graphite and diamond. There are other new ones, carbon nanotubes, for example, are made of carbon, but they're different. And this pencil lead and these diamonds, jewelry, these diamonds, we know that they're different because the carbon atoms are assembled in very different structures. So in the graphite, the carbon atoms are assembled in hexagonal sheets, and in the diamond, the carbon atoms are assembled in tetrahedrons. And the graphite is soft and dark, and the diamond is hard and clear. And there are two key intellectual ideas there. First, this softness and darkness and hardness and clearness aren't properties of the carbon atoms. They're properties of the collection of carbon atoms. And second, which properties you get depends on how you connect the carbon atoms to each other. Connect them one way, you get one set of properties. Connect them another way, you get a different set of properties. And it's the same with social groups. It's the same with groups and firms. You can take a group of people and you connect them one way. And we've shown this experimentally in my lab. We've done many experiments. You can take a group of people and you connect them one way and they're healthy, happy, cooperative, innovative, coordinate their activities. Or you take the same human beings and assemble them a different way with a different network topology, and they're none of those things. They're unhealthy, unhappy, uncooperative, uninnovative, and can't coordinate for a damn. So it's the same human beings, but they have these different properties at the level of groups. So these properties, these innovation, for example, or coordination, or cooperation, or health, might therefore be seen not just or even as properties of individuals, but rather as properties of collections of individuals, as properties of groups. So the first recognition is that groups of people can have properties that transcend the individuals themselves, just like the carbon example, and that these properties are very situation specific. So if I asked you, well, which is better, graphite or diamond? You would say, well, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to write a message to propose to your wife, you want a pencil. If you're trying to give her a gift on the occasion of your proposal, probably better to give her a diamond. So it depends. And I have to give the same answer to executives who ask, well, what properties should my workplace have? And the answer is, it depends on the objective function. It depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve. There is no generic answer, but I can tell you that structure matters. Now, if you want to intervene in structure, there are two broad ways that you can think about, and that our laboratory and many labs around the world have been thinking along these lines. You can intervene in connection or in contagion. You can intervene in the structure of the network or in the function of the network. So a structural intervention is an intervention in which you manipulate who's connected to whom. So for example, a very simple health-related example, and almost all my work is in health, would be Alcoholics Anonymous. You have a group of people who are strangers to each other, you bring them together, you form a group where everyone knows everyone else, and this group now has a collective property, namely the ability to suppress alcohol consumption. Or you take a group of men, typically also women, men and women, who previously were strangers to each other, couldn't give a damn about each other, and you bring them together and you put them in basic training and you put them in a squad, and by the end, they're willing to die for each other. Here are these people who couldn't give a damn about each other before, now they're willing to die for each other, based on an intervention that you have implemented where you manipulate the structure of the interactions. So these collective properties, this alcohol suppression property or the willingness to die property, are emergent properties that did not arise within the individuals themselves, but because of how you connected them. And there are many examples of this. For example, in workplaces, how you arrange offices, what kind of rules you have for how work teams form and reform. We've done some interesting experimental work showing that you want not too much fluidity nor too much rigidity in work teams. You want kind of middle range is optimal for a variety of objectives. So the structure matters, first one. Second, in practice, it's often very difficult to manipulate structure of networks. You can't force people to be friends with each other typically, except in the army. You can't force people to cut their relationships. You can no longer speak to her. Stop. You can't do that. So there what you do is you accept the structure of the network, but you instead thoughtfully intervene in what we call contagion. So rather than manipulating connection, you manipulate contagion, and you intervene in the function rather than the structure of the networks. Here the idea is that you might identify structurally influential individuals, people who are located within a location within the graph, the social graph, such that when they adopt a practice, others copy them. This is very valuable for the diffusion of innovation. Incidentally, the same technology is also useful for bioterrorism. I mean, who should you infect in a city to maximize, who's Typhoid Mary? Who do you infect to get everyone else to be infected? Well, you typically would want a very centrally located person, a person with many social connections. That's much more effective to infect that person than a monk or a nun, someone who's isolated in the mountains, let's say. So by understanding how things spread within networks and by using a variety of mathematical tools, it's possible to identify structurally influential individuals. And we've done, again, many experiments to show this too, often in developing world settings with public health interventions, but the same ideas can be deployed in firms that are trying to facilitate the diffusion of innovation, or hospitals that are trying to affect drug prescribing behavior, or factories that are trying to enhance safety practices, etc., to create artificial tipping points. So what you do is you say, okay, there are 100 or 1,000 people in this village. Who are the 10 or 50 people that I need to persuade to change their behavior so that if they do it, the rest of the village will copy them? So I guess I would sum up by saying to managers that it's very important to understand it's not just about the human capital in your organization, it's about the social capital, about the network structure and function in your organization, and it matters. And second, generically, there are two ways you can intervene, manipulating or think about intervening, connection and contagion. But there isn't a specific generic recommendation of what to do that I can give you, because if you ask me which is better, graphite or diamond, I would say, what do you want to do?